Kia ora, welcome to Womenpower. This week we're starting to talk to the political parties about how they'll promote women's equality in 2014. We'd hope to bring you a range of views from across the political spectrum. We invited the Minister of Women's Affairs to appear on Womenpower so we could ask her what issues National regarded as important to advancing gender equality in 2014. We wanted to speak to her about how the government would progress these policies if re-elected. But unfortunately, the Minister, Jo Goodhue, declined our invitation to appear on Womenpower. So shortly, we'll start our political interviews by speaking to Labour's Women's Affairs spokesperson, Carol Beaumont. But first, we talk to University of Auckland law lecturer Kylie Quince about how the law discriminates against women and what Māori women's experiences of the legal system are. Let's welcome Kylie Quince. Kia ora, Kylie, welcome to the program.
Kia ora.
How do our laws discriminate against women?
Well, I think the thing we need to start with is looking at what we mean by discrimination. So New Zealand does very well in terms of not formally discriminating against women or children or other, we tend to have what look like neutral laws so that they're not overtly discriminatory. So we look quite good in comparison to other jurisdictions in having laws that look like we don't pick on or prioritise certain cultures, gender, ethnicity, religious groups. So in that sense, when we're not generally not overtly discriminatory. So when we say that, well, in my opinion, when we say that laws discriminate against women or other groups, for Māori, for example, we're talking about two things. We're talking about the formation of law and policy, so whose values does law encapsulate or embed, or whose perspectives does it embed, and then at the other end we're talking about the application of law, so how it's used against certain populations or demographic groups. So in that sense I say we're not formally discriminatory, but the impact of certain laws, for example, pay equity is one example, where women in New Zealand, like most jurisdictions, women are paid less than men. So there is formal equality in law for that, but the way that our workplaces are structured, the way that our culture is structured means that women earn less than men. So the law could do something to fix those things, but in taking what looks like a neutral stance, it actually has a disparate impact upon women. So that's one example.
What about the experiences of Māori women in our legal system?
Well, that adds another aspect to discrimination. So if we think about the ways that law have a disproportionate impact upon Māori generally, and upon women, and upon poor people or people at socio-economic disadvantage, then Māori women are often at the intersection of all of those identities. So anything that therefore discriminates or has a disparate or disproportionate impact upon poor people, so welfare laws for example, laws relating to children of course, because there's a higher rate of both birth and solo parenthood for Māori women, anything surrounding those issues is going to have a bigger impact upon Māori women. So the welfare policy asking you to go back to work when your youngest child turns 5, for example, has a greater impact upon Māori women because they're more likely to be beneficiaries, more likely to be solo parents, and therefore they are then in that group of people that law applies to. So the experience of Māori women is impacted upon by their socio-economic positioning as well as their culture and their gender. So all of those things combine to make a unique experience. It's not just that you add on being Māori to being a woman, or that you add on poverty to gender, race and class. It's a unique position where the experience of Māori women is different to that of non-Māori women, and it's also different to that of Māori men. So solo parenthood, for example, is something that other women might share, but most Māori men don't. That's a particular phenomenon for Māori women.
And what about the experience of Māori women in our criminal justice system?
A similar phenomenon where the offending profile, so the type of offences that Māori women commit, the response of the system to those women is unique to Māori women. So Māori women commit different types of offences to more violent offending, for example, than non-Māori women, but less so than Māori men. More property-related and drug-related offences, which is a female experience of offending, so that they're quite unique. But then if you're talking about penalty, that's where your socioeconomic positioning plays a part. So you're, for example, more likely to be imprisoned because you are a beneficiary, or you can't pay a fine like someone in a middle class can pay.
And there's been that very good research from Victoria University that compared imprisonment rates for beneficiaries and tax evaders. Astonishing.
Yes, an incredibly discriminatory. You would think that that turns on its head the idea that we usually have in criminal justice, that you do the crime, you do the time, and it's proportionate to the offending. So non-violent offending and imprisonment should not compute. That shouldn't go together, but it does in respect of certain types of offending and certain types of offender.
What do you think we can learn in Aotearoa about processes used by Indigenous people in other countries?
So there are the other settler states, if you like, so particularly where other Commonwealth countries or former Commonwealth countries such as Australia, Canada and the United States, but particularly Australia and Canada, in their experience and what they provide for their native populations, their Aboriginal peoples. Not so much Australia, but one thing that Canada and Australia do have in common that I think we lack in New Zealand is a really strong non-government sector, so a really strong civil society. The reason that's important is that sector is where you get pressure brought to bear upon law and policy makers to make changes, to make reforms. So they're often community-based organisations. That's quite haphazard in New Zealand, that we go through cycles of having strong civil society and strong responses to government reports, or they really bring they bring pressure to bear on change, and I think both Australia and Canada have really strong community organisations that are much more cohesive and together, if you like.
How can restorative justice and alternative dispute resolution be used, do you think, to improve the experiences of Māori and women in our systems?
So alternative dispute resolution or restorative justice processes tend to move some of the process of resolving disputes out of formal court processes. So if you think about some of the criticisms we have about those formal processes, they're competitive, they're quite intimidatory. People talk about being re-victimised and not having their culture or gender accounted for example. So there is the potential for those alternative processes to provide a different experience of those things. So that's the positive side of taking a more personal, relationship-oriented approach to dispute resolution. So those things that we think of as being more feminine as opposed to the masculine-oriented court justice and an adversarial system.
What changes would you like to see in our legal system to improve outcomes for Māori and women?
Well, that's a huge question. So I think, as I've mentioned, a strong civil society. So partly, so at both ends of that issue I've talked about in discrimination, of both the application of law, that requires a representation of people that look like you as decision makers, as lawmakers and policy makers in Parliament, as people in the civil servants, as police and law enforcement, judiciary. I mean, a massive, there has been some incremental change in respect of gender representation, not a great deal in the bench, but in relation to Māori, very small. No. Two women in the Supreme Court, Court of Appeal and High Court, two Māori, and neither of them women. So that's again the impact of both gender and culture. We wouldn't expect those two Māori judges to be representing Māori women. So both at that end in terms of the application of law, but also the law-making processes. Whose values, whose perspectives are you bringing to bear on laws and policies in New Zealand?
Thanks a lot, Kylie. Now it's time for the Womenpower Fail and Womenpower Win. In the United States, Republicans in the Senate have blocked a Democrat-backed bill aimed at preventing paycheck discrimination against women. It's the third consecutive year in which Senate Democrats have advanced the bill and Republicans have shot it down, arguing that it will be detrimental to business owners. The bill would make it harder for employers to pay women less than men in comparable jobs. It would also make it easier for women to sue when this happens. Dalit women are targeted by rapists simply because they're part of the untouchable caste. Two women are now rallying the roughly 80 million Dalit women around the world to tell them they don't have to suffer in silence. The Dalit Women's Movement recently organised a march in India and visited rape survivors to empower them. Women and children of all ages marched an entire day in extreme heat to confront a town mayor, and he ran away from them. The woman took matters into their own hands by charging into his office and writing "shame" on his wall. Now, let's talk to Labour's Women's Affairs spokesperson, Carol Beaumont, about how Labour plans to advance the position of women in 2014 and beyond. Kia ora, Carol. Welcome to the program.
Thanks. Kia ora, Catriona.
What does Labour think are the most important issues for women in Aotearoa in 2014?
Well, it's probably a big list, but I mean the first point I'd make is that women are going backwards under this national government on any measure you like. We're going backwards and some really important areas are not being addressed, like pay equity, like violence against women. So I think if I had to nail it down, I'd say inequality. And I mean that in quite a broad sense, inequality both in terms of women are doing poorly and are overrepresented in those who are living in poverty, but also inequality in terms of women being able to progress and have real choices and real opportunities and real equality, in fact. So that's a problem. Violence against women remains an absolute running sore, really. It is a shocking state, and we're really not addressing that, so I'd have to put that up there. As I said, poverty, I think that women and children are overrepresented in those living in poverty, and when we talk about 280,000 children living in poverty, those children live in families, and many of those families are either headed by a woman or reliant on the income of a woman, and so the two are not unrelated.
So you said that women are going backwards under National. My perception would be that Labour led the government for 9 years and unfortunately women didn't make a lot of progress then.
I don't agree with that. I think women did make progress under Labour governments generally, including the last one, and I think we've actually got a very proud track record, and there's always more you want to do, and I'm Women's Affairs spokesperson. I feel passionately about this. I'm a lifelong feminist, but we did do many positive things. We've had at least 2 goes on the pay equity front, both of which have been immediately overturned by incoming national governments. We had the task force on sexual violence and on domestic violence, paid parental leave, a whole number of measures where the EEO Commissioner's role being established, plan of action for New Zealand women, many things. Obviously, we didn't solve it. We didn't get to the point when we went out of government that there was real equality, that there was real opportunity and there was real choice. And those 3 elements are the mantra that certainly I'm trying to ensure that the next Labour government after the election this year will be following. So, there are many policies that we will be putting in place to advance equality for women when we're elected.
So perhaps if we can turn to specifics, what will be 5 key policies Labour's going to promote in the election this year to advance women's equality?
Yeah. What I've done is I've sort of chunked them into areas in my own mind anyway, because, rather than particular specific policies, as a grouping of policies. So firstly around employment equity and economic security, if you like. So we've already been saying that we'll lift the minimum wage immediately. In fact, we'll lift it twice in the first year. We will address the living wage for those people that are directly employed by government. Pay equity's right on the top of our list of immediate priorities, and that will include policy and legislative rights which say that there is a right to equality in the workplace, that there's a responsibility on the employer to provide that and a mechanism to deliver it, because frankly we've had 2 goes, as I've already said, and this time we've got to get it right. It's just unacceptable that women working in really important jobs like caring in the aged care sector are paid the pittance that they're paid, that they cannot live on, and that their families then suffer as a consequence. Their lifetime earnings are, mean that they're likely to be living in poverty when they retire. It's just unacceptable. So that's one of the areas. Paid parental leave, we've already said we will extend to 26 weeks, and I want to acknowledge my colleague Sue Moroney for all the work she's done on that to date, and the fact that of course the government are going to veto her bill if they get a chance to do so, despite the fact, we could get it through under this current government. They will veto it, National will veto it. I also want us to be looking at what other extensions there might be in that space, but we haven't actually finalised our policy, so I can't be more explicit than that. The big one is around eliminating violence against women, both sexual and domestic violence. I am determined that we will have both an immediate response, so that will be around the things we know now that we need to do. Secure the funding for the services there, the prevention work, look at some of the police and court system stuff that we can do fairly immediately. But what I want us to do is get to the point that we have a long-term plan of action in place, as is already the case in the UK and Australia, where we set about in a collaborative way, an integrated way, a resourced way, involving everybody, government, the community sector, etc., to say we're going to work on this together and we are going to sort this out. And the word long term is there not because of any delaying tactic, but because this is about cultural change, and that can't happen overnight. We've got to be quite determined as a country. So for me that's a really big issue. 2 others I'd add to get to my 5. One is around women's representation and participation. So at the moment, women are siloed into either, a group of generally low-paid jobs, but even where they're not, within any particular occupation, they're concentrated at the bottom. So there's horizontal and vertical segregation. That's got to change, and so we've got some specific measures in mind there. But certainly the ones that we can immediately control are things like women on state sector boards, making sure that within government agencies there's clear EEO plans in place. I'd like to look at monitoring and things like good employer provisions, and whether we can use some of those to expand that out further. And then something that we've done in the past, but there seems to be a great deal of interest in putting in place again, and I see real merit in, is an action plan for New Zealand women, that we actually say, all right, this is what we want to achieve over the next 5 years. We do that in a way that we engage with the community to identify what those things are. We set measurable goals and we actually work our way through them in a systematic way. So I'd highlight those 5. Our women's policy will hopefully include a great deal more than that, but they, for me, are the 5 that I see as the really big ticket items.
And so you've had a copy of the Women's Election Agenda, Aotearoa. So that's got 100 points.
Yep.
What points of that can Labor support?
Well, at the moment, and I've already indicated this offline to a couple of the people who've been involved in producing that, as I've said, our policy's not yet finalised, so it's very difficult for me to say, well, we support 88 of them, unfortunately. But having said that, a lot of them, the direction they're going in is certainly the direction that we want to go. There are, we have to have a realistic agenda. There's no question in my mind that we have to say we will be leading a responsible government, that, people want us to live within the government's means. We've said we will look at the tax system to give ourselves a bit more room to move, and some of the areas that we've already talked about are priority areas. But the things in it that aren't specifically, that I've already mentioned, but violence, pay equity, paid parental leave, flexible working hours. We've already said we'll abolish the 90-day trial period in youth wages. Prioritising housing. Housing will be one of our big ticket policies. So just running my way through the 100, I can see many of them are consistent with things we've said. Others, certainly the general direction, like things like the Law Commission views on court processes around sexual violence cases. Andrew Little and I have been doing quite a lot of work in that space and talking to a lot of people, and we want to see some changes there that will be consistent, I think, with what the Law Commission was talking about. So I'm confident that we will get maybe not close to, all 100, but the majority of them, and I think, some of them we can absolutely tick off and say, yes, 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 these are immediate priorities.
One issue that there isn't any progress on at the moment is increasing the number of female MPs. It's been stuck at about a third for actually the last 5 elections now. I was surprised to hear that. So what can be done about that? And I mean, it was such a pity last year that just this issue being raised by Labor created such controversy.
I quite agree. I think it was appalling. I was appalled with the whole thing about it being a man ban and all of that, not wanting to reignite the debate. But look, we're doing better, a lot better than National in this regard. So I think we're just on 40% at the moment in our caucus. And we have committed to ensuring that after this election, 45% of our caucus will be women, and after the next election, 50% at least. So we've made those decisions. We went through the process. We, did create a storm of controversy in doing so, but we're not doing it because we think that we need to put in incompetent women or anything else. There is an absolute pool of talent out there already in our selections up and down New Zealand, which are highly contested in just about every case, I might add. We're getting some wonderful new women candidates coming through, and all the evidence shows that having more women MPs does actually make a difference in parliaments, all the international evidence, and basically having less than the 50% means we're not actually fully accessing the talent pool in our country. So we are committed to this. We will see definite steps in place to ensure that the Labor caucus, certainly by 2017, if we don't achieve it this time, by the next election we will achieve gender balance in our caucus.
Thanks very much, Carol. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Now it's time for News of the Week. More than 90% of Hollywood and British movies are still directed by men. Now some of the industry's biggest names, including Dame Helen Mirren, Sienna Miller and Jane Campion, are being asked to choose their favourite young female directors to make a film. The initiative is the brainchild of Dazed Vision. A new law in American Samoa designed to combat human trafficking will take effect in June. More than 200 Vietnamese women were previously enslaved in American Samoa. The Centre for Women in Science, Engineering and Technology in Seoul has held a Gendered Innovation Forum to discuss the role of women in science and technology. The forum opened with a call for a new paradigm for the role of women in science in Asia. Rwandan women have made major strides towards equality in the 20 years since the Rwandan genocide. But domestic violence remains common and widely accepted. A 2011 report said that 57% of women questioned had experienced violence by a partner, while 32% had been raped by their husbands. An Auckland mother of 2 who is pregnant with her 3rd child has lost her job at an Auckland service station after a new lessee took over. Charlie Thompson will now miss out on paid parental leave because she does not have a job. The Triangle service station owner denied that Charlie had been dumped because she was pregnant, saying that decisions about employees were based on whether they had the Z energy factor and were the best fit for the role. United States President Barack Obama was due to sign an executive order preventing federal contractors from retaliating against employees who exchange information about their salaries. The measure is designed to reduce the gender pay gap. A group of 500 Mormon women in the American state of Utah is seeking ecclesiastical equality with men and plan to seek admission to a male-only session. Adorned in purple, the members of Ordained Women plan to march from a park to a temple and stand in line for seats to a priesthood meeting. The gender pay gap in the United States means that women earn around 77 cents for every dollar men earn. The gap is even worse in Montana, where women earn only 67 cents for every male dollar. An Equal Pay for Equal Work task force created last year organised the state's first Equal Pay Summit. The task force is due to make recommendations by April 30 on how the gap can be closed. From 1 October this year, Australian businesses with more than 500 employees will have to put in place strategies to achieve greater equality in the workplace. Critics say that the measures do not go far enough, as many businesses have far fewer than 500 employees. As the Oscar Pistorius murder trial continues in South Africa, one media outlet has put it in a broader context by noting that one woman is killed every 8 hours in South Africa by her male partner. A rural doctor has been found guilty of professional misconduct for giving women drugs to induce abortions. The physician was suspended from practicing for 6 months by the Health Practitioners Disciplinary Tribunal. The doctor said that she considered her actions a necessary service. She said she'd been overwhelmed by the need to help those desperately seeking help. A Christchurch District Court judge has questioned why a child sex abuse survivor wanted to read a victim impact statement to the court when her abuser was sentenced. Shane Roy Dennis was sentenced on 11 charges of doing indecent acts and 1 charge of inducing a girl to do an indecent act. All charges related to girls aged under 12 at the time. As one survivor prepared to read her victim impact statement, Judge Saunders asked why she wanted to do so. He said that the case would have benefited from restorative justice, but the victims had declined to participate. He also said that he was not comfortable with the victim reading her victim impact statement in court when the defendant did not have a chance to reply effectively. Quote, "I'm not comfortable about it now. This doesn't have a sense of balance about it. There's no opportunity for formal interaction or apology. I'm not sure what she's trying to achieve." Close quotes. The Crown prosecutor explained to the judge that it was the victim's right to read the statement and was part of the healing process for her. Now it's time for the 5 action points. Lobby political parties to include strong and detailed women's policies in their 2014 election manifestos. Monitor the implementation of women's policies post-election. Learn from processes used by Indigenous peoples in other nations. Restore legal aid funding to provide proper representation to Māori and other women in the court system. Reverse the family court changes and ensure the family court responds far better to domestic violence. That's our program for this week. Join me next week when we'll hear from the Greens about their gender equalities for 2014. We'll also speak to community activist Anjum Rahman about what additional hurdles women of colour face when running for public office and how these can be overcome. Thanks for watching. Ka kite anō.